tonight is the level of religious tolerance is not just tolerance in Syria. They are traditionally known for having a deep and abiding respect between the different religious groups. For example, on Easter, which was I was there on Easter weekend. The weekends in the Middle East are Fridays and Saturdays. But in Syria, Easter Sunday is a national holiday. At Christmas and Easter, Muslims will very often attend the services in the churches. And very often, the churches will celebrate Ramadan with the Muslims and give them the iftar, the meal afterwards. After the weekend was over, it was time for work to begin, and that meant meeting with government officials there and working on getting permissions, because what I wanted to do was travel around the country by myself with just my friend beside, and just be free to talk to anybody and see as many people, meet as many people from as many walks of life as I possibly could. The first person I met is Dr. Huthaina Shaban, who Senator Black knows well, and she's actually the one that got my visa approved. She is President Assad's top political advisor and his media advisor. She's a brilliant woman, educated in the UK, and we met, and it was just like meeting a friend from the beginning. She and I sat down, we spent about an hour and a half together talking about everything from husbands and families to no-fly zones, over Syria. And at the end of the conversation, she just basically said, wherever you want to go, what you want to do, you've got my okay. And she was the okay I needed. So my plans were in good shape. So we met with her for about an hour and 15 minutes, and then she said, come along with us. I'm meeting a delegation from Germany and Belgium. And so we sat in that, and it was another brilliant talk from her about the current situation in the war. And then she said, I want you to go with the delegation to meet the Grand Mufti. And I've been wanting to meet the Grand Mufti. But first, just a few pictures of President Assad. As I'm talking about the Syrian government, I think a lot of people here have been wired to be like, oh, the regime, the regime. And we don't really see the reality of how the Syrian people see their leader, their army. These are just some random shots of President Assad. This one I love because it's very typical. He would just go to restaurants and go hang out with people in restaurants. He and his wife typically will go to a village and spend time with families there. They just went to the home of a family that some of the men had been wounded in the war. There he is eating with the army. Literally, I think that's a kilometer or so from the front line there. There he's in a refugee center. There he's meeting with Christian leaders. He's a very warm and personable man. Other pictures that you might not have seen, in city after city, as we were seeing pictures of protests that we were told were peaceful protests, and some of them were peaceful marches for calling for reforms in the government. All throughout Syria, there were these massive pro-President Assad demonstrations. This is just one. In Lattakia, Deir ez-Zor, Raqqa, Lattakia, Homs, Aleppo, all over the country, there were these massive pro-government demonstrations or rallies that you never saw. And I know people who were in there, and they'll tell you, and I've seen videos, those people are singing and dancing, and they're saying, we're all Bashar, we're all Syria. This is...
Where did you get these pictures?
These are, I'm sorry, some of these are stock. These are from the internet. This is a picture from Lebanon at the recent election in June of 2014. Now, there's no secret police, there's no military pointing a gun at these people's heads telling them to vote for President Assad. The line, in fact, in Lebanon for people to go vote was 2 miles long. They had to open voting for the next day so that people could vote. In that election, the president received an 88% approval rating, basically. And I can testify that every person I talked to would agree. It doesn't mean they all agree with him about everything politically. There are members of the opposition, of the genuine political opposition there, that have genuine grievances. But they are backing their leadership and their army in this time of war. So I finally get to meet the Grand Mufti, Dr. Hassoun. The Grand Mufti in Syria is the top spiritual cleric, the top religious figure in the country. And early on, he made a few crazy statements. Things like, if Muhammad told you to kill followers of Moses and followers of Jesus, he is no prophet of God. This man is a man of, he loves God, and his son, because he was saying things like that, was assassinated by what we call moderate rebels. He was killed. The rebels were captured. They were put in prison. He went to the prison and he forgave them. And at his son's funeral, he gave the most impassioned speech, calling for forgiveness and reconciliation in the country. After I had heard him speak with the delegation, because he knew I was friends with Senator Black, I got to spend about 15-20 minutes with him privately, with he and my friend. And I can just tell you, I felt like I met a brother that day. And it's not just me. I have a friend, Reverend David Smith of Australia, who's very, very close friends with the Mufti. Also Reverend Andrew Ashton, who's an Anglican priest in the UK, same thing. And his right-hand man is a Christian. Many of his best friends are rabbis. He is a special guy. He's a great religious kind of father figure for the country. You can see this is one of the patriarchs of the Syriac Church and the Grand Mufti. They're very good friends. There are very often conferences held where all of the religious leaders of the country were gathered. There are 27 religious sects in Syria. Sunnis make up the majority. They're about 70% of the population. Then Alawites, then Christians that make up about 10% of the country. Druze, Kurd, Ismailis, the list goes on and on. Of the Christian churches, there is just about every major denomination there. Of course, the Eastern Orthodox is predominant, and the Catholics, but there's Anglican, Lutheran, Methodist, Baptist, Evangelical, non-denominational. This is an archbishop here, and he's giving blood for the war effort there. These are just some comments made by Christian leadership there. The Archbishop of Homs saying that this is not a civil war, it's a world war on Syrian territory. The Syrian government protects us. This is the Patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox Church. He says, we are not asking for the West for military intervention to defend Christians and all others. We're asking them to stop arming and supporting terrorist groups that are destroying our countries and massacring our people. Syrian Catholic Archbishop, Western propaganda keeps talking about moderate rebels who do not exist. The Syrian people will decide if and when President Assad has to go, not ISIS or the West. This is a story, a theme that will be developing over the course of the evening here. The next person I got to meet with is Dr. Ali Haider. He is the Minister of Reconciliation, one of the top levels in the government there. He's an interesting fellow. He is the leader of the political opposition in Syria, one of the large political opposition groups. His son also was murdered by rebels early in the conflict. Now he is one of the high-level ministers in the cabinet of the country. And I sat down with him. He said, just ask me any question. And for about an hour, 20 minutes, I could just fire one question at him after another. All these leaders that I met are brilliant, so highly educated, and just open. I could say anything, I could ask anything. But this picture I love. To me, this really represents Syria to me. This is in one of the old Damascus homes. You just see a little door off a tiny alleyway, and you go in, and there's this beautiful, gorgeous room with the courtyard and the fountain. The house is owned by this man here who's a Sunni. His best, longest, dearest friend is this guy who's a Christian. The guy taking the picture, my buddy, is an Alawite who's also good friends with the two of them. And we're just hanging out, telling stories and drinking arak, which is the liquor that is often home brewed in Syria. It's kind of like ouzo. It's licorice and grape. And you mix it with water and it turns cloudy like that, and believe me, it has quite a kick. And I asked them, I said, when I go back to America, what do you want me to tell people? And they said, tell them there are no moderate rebels, tell them we love Americans, and we hate what your government is doing here. I said, okay, I'll tell them that. This is Brad Hoff. This is not from my visit, but I wanted to share. This guy he's a U.S. Marine, and he spent years in Syria. He speaks Arabic, and he wrote a beautiful article called A Marine in Syria. And this is just one line out of it. He said, I found a place of beauty, peace, and coexistence in a Syria that is now almost never acknowledged, and which risks being forgotten about, but Syrians themselves will never forget. One of the slides before I figured out how to use this new computer was the British BBC show Top Gear, if any of you are familiar with that. They visited Syria in 2010, right before this war. They loved it, and they said that Damascus goes straight to the list of top 5 cities of all time. It was becoming one of the fastest growing tourist destinations in the world, and at that time before the war was actually listed as the 4th safest country to visit in the world. Now it is listed for 2